The South China Sea is one of the most strategically important and contested bodies of water in the world. It's not just a hotspot for shipping lanes or rich fishing grounds. It's a region of military maneuvering, sovereignty claims, and escalating power plays. The interaction between the U.S. Navy and China's People's Liberation Army Navy in this area is becoming increasingly complex. A chilling yet fascinating example of this occurred on October 8, 2025, when two Chinese warships, the Type 052D destroyers, approached the United States ship John Finn in what could have been a tense standoff. However, instead of an explosive confrontation, this incident highlighted the quiet, controlled art of naval diplomacy and restraint. A routine mission turns unsettling. At 3:42 p.m. local time on October 8th, the United States ship John Finn DDG-113, a U.S. Navy destroyer, was conducting a routine freedom of navigation operation through international waters in the South China Sea. The mission was simple: assert the U.S.'s rights to navigate through international waters, document everything, and remain neutral. The John Finn was moving at a steady pace, on course, and without any sign of disturbance. But out of the blue, radar detected two large surface contacts closing in from the northwest. At first glance, they seemed like routine fishing vessels, but something felt off. These vessels weren't slowing down or veering off course. Their trajectory was direct and intentional. The radar confirmed that they were two Chinese Type 052D destroyers, the Liu Yang class, which are equipped with 64 vertical launch cells and long-range anti-ship missiles. At this point, the situation was no longer routine, it was deliberate. Unspoken tension and silent observation. The John Finn's crew understood quickly that they were now part of something more significant than a routine mission. On the bridge, the officers monitored the approaching destroyers, watching the distance close with increasing speed. As the gap between the ships shrank to 12 nautical miles, the crew could sense the tension in the air. The Chinese warships were not trailing or shadowing the John Finn, they were intentionally intercepting it. Their heads were angled directly towards the American ship, and their engines roared as they cut through the sea. There was no communication from the Chinese ships, no hails, no signal lights, and no transmission, just the silent hum of the radar and the ominous approach. The John Finn's crew, well trained for these situations, stayed calm. The captain issued the order to maintain course and posture. They weren't going to deviate from their path. The John Finn's crew began to deploy their optical and infrared sensors, and the electronic warfare suite was activated to record every radar pulse coming from the Chinese ships. The captain's voice crackled over the comms. Let them show intent. The unspoken message was clear. The crew of the John Finn wasn't about to make the first move. The Chinese ships, on the other hand, had clearly shown theirs. The subtle show of force. At 3:57 p.m., the John Finn's crew saw the Chinese ships continue to close the distance. The range now stood at just 2.7 nautical miles, a dangerously close proximity in naval terms. The John Finn's officers, adhering to the strict rules of engagement, continued to observe, document, and not provoke. They called for a visible posture change, not as a sign of aggression, but as a reminder of their own preparedness. The forward 5-inch Mark 45 gun on the John Finn slowly rotated 5 degrees to starboard, a subtle but deliberate motion. The gun wasn't locked, nor was it loaded. It was simply visible enough for the Chinese ships to see it move. It was a message: we are ready, but we are not going to initiate hostilities. Meanwhile, on the flight deck, preparations were underway for the MH-60R Seahawk helicopter. It would provide real-time aerial surveillance, a sharp eye from above that would capture every movement, every heat signature, and every radar pulse. In naval warfare, the more you can see, the more control you have. The Chinese response. On board the Chinese ships, the crew could not have failed to notice the actions of the John Finn. As the two ships adjusted their formation, bringing their distance even closer, their radar tone shifted. They weren't just observing anymore, they were taking measurements. They had turned on their surface search radar, a clear sign that they were scanning the American ship. But the John Finn remained steady, unfazed by the provocation. The crew continued to monitor and document without responding to the radar emissions or attempting to jam the Chinese ship signals. Instead, they waited. At 4:06 p.m., the first vocal exchange came over the radio. In crisp Mandarin, the Chinese ships ordered the John Finn to adjust its heading, claiming that the U.S. vessel had entered Chinese jurisdictional waters. This was a classic move in the tense game of sovereignty claims that have plagued the South China Sea for years. However, the John Finn's response was calm and measured, almost rehearsed. This is a United States warship conducting legal operations in international waters, as permitted under international law. Your actions are unsafe. Recommend you alter course immediately." The message wasn't confrontational. It wasn't aggressive. It was legal, diplomatic, and above all professional. The John Finn wasn't here to escalate. It was here to demonstrate its unwavering right to navigate freely through international waters. A shift in the tension. The response seemed to have an effect. The Chinese ship's lead destroyer throttled down, reducing its speed from 26 knots to 22. The distance between the ships began to widen, and the intercept angle began to shift from a direct confrontation to a parallel course. There was no shouting, no weapons fired, no dramatic gestures, just the quiet, methodical shifting of positions as both ships recognized the limits of their standoff. In the John Finn's Combat Information Center, the mood lightened slightly. The rules of engagement were followed to the letter, and the crew had managed to de-escalate a potential crisis without firing a shot. The situation was still tense, but it had moved away from the danger zone. Both ships were now sailing parallel to each other, maintaining their course but no longer on a collision path. By 4:15 p.m., the Chinese ships had altered their course. They moved away from the John Finn's lane, and their radar tone faded. The John Finn's crew had successfully navigated the crisis with professionalism, restraint, and a clear message of resolve. Navigating tensions in the South China Sea. This encounter is not just an isolated incident, it's part of a growing trend in the South China Sea, where China has been increasing its naval presence and activity. More patrols, more shadowing of foreign vessels, and more close approaches, each one a signal in the complex game of power projection in the region. For the United States, the freedom of navigation missions are about more than just asserting naval rights. They are about maintaining consistency in international law. If the US Navy were to back down each time China made a move, it would set a dangerous precedent. Every mission through these contested waters is a demonstration of US resolve. It sends a message to China and the world. The United States will not be intimidated or bullied into changing its course. The power of restraint. In this high-stakes environment, the true measure of power is not always about firepower. Sometimes it's about showing restraint. The John Finn didn't react with aggression. It didn't shout or fire a warning shot. It simply stood its ground, confident in its legal and moral right to be there. The message was clear. Presence was the weapon, and patience was the armor. In the tense world of naval diplomacy, where every move can have far-reaching consequences, sometimes the most powerful weapon is the ability to stay calm and not escalate a situation. This encounter proved that dominance at sea isn't just about firepower. It's about professionalism, discipline, and knowing when to let the other side make the first move. As tensions continue to rise in the South China Sea, the US Navy will likely face more of these encounters. But if this standoff is any indication, the Navy's strategy of calm, assertive presence, and diplomatic engagement may be the key to maintaining peace in one of the world's most contested regions. And there you have it, a masterclass in naval restraint and strategic posture. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe. We love hearing your thoughts, so drop a comment below. Should the US Navy push back harder in these situations, or is restraint the right approach? Let us know what you think. And as always, stay tuned for more exciting stories from the high seas. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.